One of my favorite plugins is dBlue Glitch. It's a very old plugin, in fact it's abandonware now, so you can pick it up for free, but it's really powerful and there isn't really a good tutorial out there explaining everything that it can do. So I figured, why not make one myself? After all, that's what I do. So this is a project that I've shown a few times in videos already. I did have to clean it up a little bit because it was getting a little bit heavy on the CPU, but it is the project in which we made all of these files here, and it included a lot of usage of dBlue Glitch. So just to give you a bit of context on what was initially in this project, here are some of the sounds that we created in here. It's actually pretty funny, you can really hear some of the characteristics of dBlue Glitch in some of these sounds. Maybe later in the video, once we've explored it, you should go back in here and listen to it for yourself to see if you can hear it. But to start off, we really need a synth sound to put this plugin on, so we're just quickly going to make one. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to insert a serum, and we'll open up a basic shapes over here. And then I want to first of all randomize the wavetable here. Now what we can do is we can add this LFO here to the coarse pitch, and I'm just going to up it all the way. We're really trying to already make this kind of texture in the sense that we're trying to make a very glitchy kind of synth. So that's what I'm aiming for in the sound design. What I'll also do is I'll set this to 1/2, maybe to like 1 bar here. And then I'll also randomize this with the note on random 2 here. And now we get something like this. You can imagine that this is a really cool starting point for some glitchy sound design. In order to make it a bit more interesting, I'm going to give it 2 voices of unison and I'm going to lower that detune. I'm also going to add a filter to it, and we'll just do like a high pass filter for this one. Let's add a little bit of extra movement to this by also adding the note on random over here. Let's lower that a little bit in here though, so that we don't go all the way up to the highest frequencies. And now what I want to do is I want to just lay out a MIDI clip for this. And you can hear that we're getting the same sound just playing for a very long time. Obviously, we don't really want this. We want it to be continuously changing. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make, just like the files that we saw over here, a very long file with a whole bunch of different sounds in it that you can then just pick from and use in your productions. So in order to do that, we want to continuously trigger this. And the way that you do that is with the arpeggiator. In this case, I want to set it to probably like quarter notes. And now we get something like this. So this is a nice starting point, and we should probably add dBlue Glitch at this point. So this is how the plugin opens up. This is when it launches. And you can see that there's a whole bunch of different parameters. There's a whole bunch of different things going on. Not a lot that you really have to worry about because there's a lot of duplication of parameters. So once you know what one parameter does for like one position over here, you'll know what they'll all do. So the way the interface is laid out, we start off with some global controls on the top here. Then we have the sequencer over here. We have the actual effects that you're applying in the sequencer. And then you have a post filter and some final controls per each effect. So the way that this works is that all of the colors in here correspond to all of the colors in here. And you can just click one of these colors and color in any of the parts that you want. Of course, you can set over here. You can right click to unify different sections. But you can see that we started out with this white stuff over here, which is actually a random effect. So it will choose for each step one of these random effects over here, which is actually very useful. Now I might say, I don't want that. I don't want to have all of that randomness in there. I want this to be deterministic. I want to exactly know what I'm doing. There's a few ways of going about that, but you don't actually have to go about that because the randomness is controlled right here. What that means though is that the placement of the effects is always going to be the same. So that means that it's close to always playing back in the exact same way. There's a little bit of randomness in some of these effects which might change from time to time. But like the placement of where the different effects lie within this randomized is just determined by the seed over here, which means that every time that you press play, you're going to have the same effect happening to the same parts of the sound. So that really means that when it comes to this plugin, you can just open it up and it will already start working, and it will also already be deterministic. You don't actually have to fill it in to get the kind of sound that you want. What you could do is you could just browse different seeds until you find the glitch pattern that you like. Now, of course, we're using a lot of randomness inside of this patch. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to make another patch here. You can just create a new chain here. Actually, another quicker way to do that is to duplicate, opening up the new serum over here. Let me just quickly turn this one off because we don't need it. And we'll just get a different patch over here, something that is a little bit easier to understand, maybe like a very nice long volume plug here on the saw wave. And you can already hear the plugin having an effect on that saw wave. Without it, it's just going to sound like this. And again, to prove that this is fully deterministic in terms of the placement of the effects, I'll play it a few times and you can hear that the placement is always the same. And of course, changing the seed will change that placement. So this is the easiest way to use it. You just load up the plugin, browse until you find a seed that works, and then you're good to go. What you may have already noticed is that each block over here is a quarter note, so that is going to work really well with most material, especially in dance music because it will just follow the pattern of the kick most of the time. But if you're not happy with quarter notes, what you can do is you can browse the pattern bank over here. Here you have 8th notes, you have 16 notes, you have half notes over here, and there's more patterns over here as well that are a little bit different as well. Can see a whole bunch of different rhythms and you can just start building up on that. What you can of course also do if you have an exact glitch idea in mind is just to start drawing that in. Maybe I want the modulator and then I want the retrigger and then I want the reverser and you just continuously fill that in there. Now you might not know exactly what you want, but you want to just randomize a bunch of different ideas. Instead of just using the seed over here, you can also use the effects. That way you actually see what is going on in here. You can just click this and it will randomize the different effects that it uses without changing the steps. There's also the steps option here, which seems to do the same thing as the both options over here. Like this randomizes the steps, but it also seems to swap out the effects that it uses. And then there's both, as I said, it just looks like it does the same thing, so I don't exactly know what the difference is in here. In terms of effects, the first one is the tape stop. This is kind of like a classic tape stop effect where it just pitches down and it slows down the audio. We have a modulator over here. This seems to do some kind of FM modulation. I find that it's pretty important to choose the right key over here if you're working with this. We have the retrigger over here, which functions very similarly to the beat repeat that you'll find here in Ableton. It just takes a small chop of the audio and repeats it a bunch of times. We have a shuffler, which is kind of like your classic buffer shuffler. It takes parts of the audio and places it at different instances in time. We have the reverser. This should be pretty obvious, but it just takes the sound and reverses it. We have a crusher, which is kind of like a bit crusher effect. We have a gator, which just gates up the sound. It just chops it up without actually changing the order of how it plays. It just silences different parts of the audio. Then we have a delay over here. Now this just works as a delay, as like a normal delay that you would have in your DAW, just like, for example, this echo over here. Just kind of like your standard delay. The only thing that is different about it is that by default, it opens up with a value that is so low that it's actually like trying to be in key. So what I found also here with this size over here is that it's pretty important that this size is somewhat tied to the key that you're working in. The way that you can calculate this size over here is that you take 1000 and you divide it by the frequency that you want to be in, and then you'll get the millisecond output over here. There's some really cool stuff going on in that this control is kind of like very big. As you can see, it can also do normal delay kind of stuff, but it might be very annoying trying to get exactly the value that you're after here, especially if you're trying to be in key and even these last numbers over here kind of count. So what you can do then is you can use this one over here and you can see you can make very small edits to the range over here. So you just have a lot more precise control here. Finally, we have the stretcher over here, which just stretches up the audio coming into it. Now, going down through the effect controls, I'm not going to go over each individual control of each effect. I think that's a little bit excessive here, mainly because it's just fun to play around with and to see what you can get. But there are some very important controls here on the top that make this plugin even more powerful. The very first one is this random percentage over here. What this actually relates to is the white bit that you see when you do something like this. Actually, let's go to the 1/8 pattern because it's easier to show that way. This is the percentage that will affect which effect is chosen by the randomization over here. You can kind of weight the different effects towards each other. So if you want a little bit more tape stop, you just turn this up. I don't want any shuffler. I might not want any gator. I want a little bit more delay. I want a little bit less stretcher, but I still want a little bit of it. You can kind of weight which effects you want more and less. Next up is the solo over here. This just solos the effect and makes sure that only this one plays. And then finally we have this knob over here, which is the global. What that does is it takes the effect out of the randomization and it will actually put it on top of everything else that is happening. Now after the effect there is a filter for each effect. So for example, if you want this tape stop effect but you don't want any, for example, low frequencies, what you can do is you can do something like this. And now you have a high pass here, which means that you can set the frequency over here so that it won't affect any of the lower frequencies. You of course also have the low pass over here, the band pass and the notch filter. So there's plenty of sculpting that you can do in here. The filter has two different modes. It has a normal mode and it also has a resonant mode, which you can switch on right here. It does warn you to be careful with this and it might get out of control if you use this. But it might also offer some really cool sound design tricks that you can do with this. The final controls that you have for each effect are the panning, the overall mix of the effect and the volume compensation here, just a little gain level here. And you can just see that for all of the effects, all of these controls are the same. Now let's quickly look at the global effects over here. We have the step envelope, which essentially turns this into a step sequencer. Right now the volume is set all the way up, but what you can do is you can turn the volume down. And then this determines how long the gate will be open for each of these triggers. So let's go back to our other synth again. Let's try to glitch that up with, in this case, 8 notes. You can hear that it's functioning like a gator now. Next up, we have the overdrive. If you want to distort the output signal, you can do that as well. Note that it's probably going to become louder. That's why you have a volume compensation. Finally, you have a master filter over here. These have the same controls that they have down below here. So low pass, high pass, band pass, and notch. The only difference being is that this has a mix knob, whereas these down below here do not. Finally, you have the overall mix over here. This just controls the balance between the dry signal and the fully processed signal. Over here though, there's an amount and this kind of sets the overall glitchiness of the plugin. So this really kind of controls the amount of all of these effects that are applied, and it isn't just like going between a dry sound and a wet sound like you have with this mix over here. Both of them are very useful, but in different contexts. The final thing interesting over here is that over here you have 3 clipping options. You can either have no clipping on the output, just some soft clipping on the output, or hard clipping on the output. And you can see that there's this nice diagram indicating which setting you're on. And that's really how the plugin just works in terms of the interface. Now, what I've noticed with these kind of plugins where it's really complex and there's a lot of parameters is that you cannot really just describe all of the parameters like I've done up until this point and just expect people to get what the plugin is doing. You really need to give them a lot of different examples. So that's what I want to do right now. I want to show you a bunch of different ways how I use it while I'm sound designing. Again, as I said, the main one that I do is I just need a new instance. I'll just open it up, whatever sound that I'm working on, and I'll just listen to different seeds over here. Of course, this is going to depend on where you place it in the track. This is mostly used when I'm trying to apply this to maybe like a short sound, or maybe I have like a fill that I want to do where I just temporarily turn up the mix for a particular sound on this effect and then I turn it down after the fill stops. What I'll usually do is just listen to that fill over and over again until I find a seed that I say like, yeah, this is the texture that I want for this fill, this is the texture that I want for this sound. There's a whole bunch of different factors involved there, like the way that it flows into the next segment, for example. So it usually takes me quite a lot of time to actually find what I want. Now, sometimes I do have an idea of exactly what I want in terms of how I want the glitch sound to kind of progress throughout time. In that case, I do start by just designing it in just drawing it in here. So for example, I would do something like this. And let's say that again, I'm working in a bar. So you can see the bars lines up here. I would really only need this segment over here. What I can do is I can use this length parameter over here to just shorten the pattern here. And now the glitch effect is just going to repeat every bar. The final way that I like to use this is to just use one of the effects. Usually this happens either with the delay or the modulator. If I want some kind of resonant texture out of it, what I'll do is just use this as kind of like a global thing here. Maybe I want the modulator. In this case, let's see if we can get this in some kind of nice key here. Maybe like a low D sharp here. Skin here, we're getting some really cool textures out of that as well. The final way that I find myself actually using this in the production is through these effects over here. So usually I'll do something like this, where I might randomize a little bit here and see if I get a pattern that I like. Usually I'll do this again at something like a bar so that the pattern kind of repeats every time. And then I can decide to change the effects here. I think that sounds pretty cool. Now, of course, the sound design journey doesn't end here. Usually what I find myself doing, especially when I'm doing these very, very kind of complex kind of sequences like we're doing here, is I just add another one. So you have our kind of like main repeating modulation that we have on top of it, and then I'll just glitch that up again. What might be nice in this case for this patch over here is to move the high pass a little bit more. It's currently just kind of stepping between different values. What I would like is for it to move up and down a little bit as well. Maybe not this high pass over here. Maybe what we can do is we can have a filter in between here, and we just set that to a band pass so that we can add some movement. Let's introduce a little bit of LFO in here. You can hear that you can get some really cool textures out of that, and it's just very interesting to sound design like this. Again, the way that I recommend that you do these kind of things is that you lay out a very big file like we're doing over here. This is like a very long, I think this is 64 bars or something like that. Then we can just freeze this when we're happy with the sound design that we did. And then once you have it flattened, you have a file that you can just use. The way to use these files though, I have explained that in a different video. So if you sound design something cool and you want to actually use it in a track, make sure you go watch that video first, because it explains how you would import this into a new project and actually start writing some music out of this. As I explained in that video, what I recommend is that you have some kind of like sound design session that you're doing over here. You can see some leftover ideas that I had that I'm experimenting with, some drums, stuff like that. But the main thing that I got from this project is, as I said before, all of these like files in here, which are these big extracts. As you can see, some of them are even longer. And the whole idea is that in an actual production, I can go in here and I can say, oh, I like this sound maybe over here, or maybe this. Maybe this sound is interesting. I want to use this in a track. I can just cut that out, consolidate it. And then we go like this. And now you have a sound like this in your track. And the cool thing is that within a file like we had before, you're creating hundreds of different sounds that you can all choose from. Not all of them are going to be good, of course, because this is kind of like randomly generated, but most of them are definitely going to be usable. So that's going to be it for today. That's everything that I wanted to show. I hope that you learned something and that you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did by leaving a like. And if you want to support the channel, make sure that you go watch some more of my videos. There should be 2 videos up on the screen right now, so just choose one of them and enjoy. That's going to be it. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.